Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Hulkran, and thank you so much for joining us for today's MLive Cannabis Insights event. We've got a great program for you today with outstanding speakers, panel discussions, Q&A, and an interactive session that will happen at the end. So the Q&A session with all the speakers will be at the end of today's program. If you have a question at any point today, get it either into the chat box and I will find it, or into the Q&A box. As always, though, if you're going to use the chat function, make sure it's to all attendees and panelists so we can all see it. Otherwise, it'll just end up with me. So before we jump in, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsors for today: Unity Road, Sarah Jane, Scilabs, and our media partner, Sensi. You can find more information from our partners both in the chat and on our event website. Now, let's get on with the show. I am super excited to once again be joined by my dear friend, Gus Burns, MLive Cannabis reporter. Gus has worked for MLive since 2009, has a cannabis industry reporter since 2019. He enjoys writing about interesting people within the industry and its socio-political and economic aspects, with the aim of bringing better understanding to the market to Michigan residents, some of whom have never tried marijuana before. My dear friend, Gus Burns, how are you this afternoon?
I'm good. Thank you for the introduction. And welcome everybody else who's here. I'm Gus Burns, as Eric told you, the cannabis reporter for MLive. And to start off, I wanted to share some industry updates relative to some of the news I've been covering this year. Michigan's marijuana industry, now in its sophomore year, continues to quickly grow. There are more cities adding licenses every day, it seems. Unfortunately, that does not include the state's largest market, Detroit, where the licensing ordinance is on hold and tied up in litigation. But one of the more recent examples of a community that has joined the industry is Northfield Township's Whitmore Lake, where Planet Provisioning celebrated its grand opening last weekend, nearly 2 years after a grassroots ballot initiative attempted to ban marijuana business there, but that ban failed. And now at least 2 more dispensaries are getting ready to open. To give you an idea of the pace of recreational retail growth, there were 214 retail licenses as of January 1st. And then as of last week, there were 374. That's nearly 160 new licenses, a 75% increase since the beginning of the year. And with all those shops, you need to supply them, right? So there are currently 380 Class C grow licenses that are active, each allowing the holder to grow 2,000 plants each, for a total of potentially 760,000 plants growing in Michigan at any given time. And that's not including the less popular Class A and B grow licenses. The current number of Class C grow licenses has more than doubled the 151 that existed on New Year's Day 2021. And a new sales benchmark was surpassed recently. In August, for the first time ever, monthly combined medical and recreational sales surpassed a pace of $2 billion per year. This year, we also got to see how the Marijuana Regulatory Agency plans to dole out statutorily mandated $20 million in tax revenue dedicated to marijuana research for veterans. The first awards went to Wayne State University, which received $7 million, and the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, known as MAPS, which received $13 million. Another $20 million will be awarded next year. And perhaps the most contentious recent topic of debate in the industry revolves around efforts to limit and more strictly regulate caregivers. A series of laws named the Michigan Cannabis Safety Act were introduced last month that would, among other things, reduce the allowable plant count for caregivers from 72 to 24 and require caregiver products to be safety tested. It would also reduce the number of allowed medical patients they could have from 5 to 1. If you haven't been paying attention to that debate and are interested, you can get a good idea of what the arguments are by watching a replay from this week's Regulatory Reform Committee, where the proposed bills were debated. With that said, let's move forward with the program, and Eric will introduce the participants in the first panel conversation.
Thank you, my friend. Let's jump right in. Our first session of the day is on consumer-facing cannabis events. And the expert in this session are Tatiana Grant. Tatiana is a native Detroiter and president of Cultivate MI Solutions. Cultivate MI Solutions is Michigan's first licensed event organizer and event planning agency that specializes in cultural marketing. Jamie Cooper is the founder and managing director of Sensi Connects. She also serves as the publisher and marketing director of Sensi Magazine. And director Andrew Brisboe. Andrew was appointed by Governor Whitmer to lead Michigan's marijuana regulatory agency in April of 2019. The agency oversees the commercial licensing as well as the medical marijuana registry card program under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Now, welcome back, Gus, along with Tatiana, Jamie, and Director Brisboe.
Good afternoon, everybody. So on our panel, we've got two event coordinators, people who are actually going to utilize these licenses, and Director Brisboe, who is behind creation of them. So I guess to start off, I'd be interested in getting you, Director Brisboe, to kind of explain. We have two licenses that mention the word event. You have the temporary event license and then the events coordinator license. So can you tell me why those two license types were created, how popular they are, and what they're being used for?
Sure. So we created these license types in order to facilitate events specifically, and the agency engages in a bifurcated process for all the licenses we issue. The first half being the evaluation of the individuals in the business that want to hold the license, and the second part of that being the evaluation of the facility itself. So when we were looking at the authorization of events, they're short-term in duration and usually are happening on a pretty quick timeline. So we weren't going to be able to evaluate the event operator every time we got an application for an event. So the marijuana event organizer is that background investigative process to determine eligibility for the license. And then once holding that license, the event organizer would submit separate applications for each event without having to go through the lengthier background evaluation process each time. We implemented this recognizing that this was a new concept that other states were starting to look at. And I think we were the first state in the country to allow these types of events to be sanctioned by the state. And we did so right at the beginning of COVID. So we did not see much participation in this space as the pandemic was evolving. And so we're just now starting to see events taking place. And I think we've issued a total of 5 or so of these licenses. We have an event that's coming up soon in the state that I think will be a little bit larger scale than some of its predecessors. So I think we're starting to see some creative approaches to this, starting to incorporate some on-site sales versus other events. I think we're more gatherings where cannabis products are going to be consumed. And so we're starting to see how entrepreneurs are considering going about this, and the agency wants to be flexible to allow those things to happen as long as they're done with local approval and we can ensure the safety of the participants.
So is it accurate then that you have to have the organizer license before you can submit for the temporary event license?
That's correct. So anyone that's interested in putting on events could go through that first step of getting the event organizer license. You're not restrained by time then when you apply for those event licenses, but it'd be good to get that process out of the way first.
So if I'm a business who wants to have an event, I need to hook up with a coordinator or organizer.
Correct. So there's 2 ways to go about it. You could get an event organizer license if you wanted to put it on events at your location, or you could establish a business relationship with someone like Tatiana. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to come help plan your event for no fee.
All right. Well, thanks for leading into that. So, I mean, Tatiana, can you give me a little background on your experience with events and then how that's fed into your role in this industry?
Got it. So I am, a licensed event organizer when it's all said and done, but my background is largely in sports and entertainment. I kind of left corporate back in the day working for the Detroit Pistons. So I was producing events for 22,076 attendees every night. That's when the Pistons were on a sellout streak for 7 straight years. And then from there, became a full-time entrepreneur and started producing events from weddings to large-scale fundraisers and galas for local celebrities. The now mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, I did his fundraising events for his campaign, professional athletes, and the like. And so essentially, I applied for the license. I have to give Andrew and his team a shout out. They were really great. I did it by myself. I didn't have an attorney or anyone who went through it with me, and got my license in 2019. I have a renewal that's due in about 30 days, but I've had the license since 2019.
So have you planned any events that have actually occurred yet?
No, we've been planning. We were actually supposed to produce Michigan's first event March of 2020. And ended up having to cancel that a few weeks before the event, and have basically spent the past, 12, 14 months determining what's the right business model given COVID to do these events, given the expenses that are required.
Okay. And at this point, do you have anything in the works that you can share as far as events?
We do, but I don't want to put it out there too much. I haven't even talked to Andrew and his team about it.
Okay.
But yes, we're hoping to get something done before the end of this year.
And I think maybe one of the events that Andrew was alluding to is the Canna Jam this weekend in Ypsilanti. Is anyone planning on going to that?
I will be there. I graduated from Eastern Michigan University, so it's homecoming weekend, and that's going on. So yeah, I'm gonna swing by, see how the festivities are going, and then I'll be going to Eastern's homecoming.
All right, and Jamie, can you kind of come in and talk about how you've entered the event space in marijuana, or where you plan to enter it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been hosting events in the cannabis space for, I guess, since about 2018, but they were more business networking events. And so pre-COVID, I was hosting about one event every single week throughout the state to bring the B2B community together. And then we also hosted Cincy Nights pre-COVID, and our Cincy Nights were our consumer-facing events where we give our advertisers a table at those events, and we just invite the community to join us and meet the cannabis brands and learn a lot about them and get educated. And so COVID hit, and we've revamped everything on the magazine side, and we started relaunching events. I did not host any cannabis licensed events this year. I did kind of give some of the other event planners to go through that learning curve of doing it the first year. I mean, like when we're the first state to do this. And so there's a massive learning curve that comes with that. And kudos to all of the event organizers that are hosting those events this year, because I'm sure that there's a lot of financial learning lessons that come with hosting an event like this and being the first. But we are looking at 2022, like Andrew talked about. There's a couple different ways that you can go about doing it, with either a license yourself or a business partnership. And so we're exploring the business partnership route, because I want our events to continue to grow, and by working with another event planner, especially an event planner that has already done some of these licensed events, I feel like we can enter the market with these events a little bit stronger than had we done it alone. So we're in conversations right now with some partners.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of directions an event could go. I mean, you could have smoking and play pin the tail on a donkey or something, but what direction do you think this is going to go? I mean, what are people going to use these events for? Is it purely entertainment? Is it marketing? What is it going to look like to the average person who attends one?
Well, cannabis is a very social product. Like, we love to socialize around cannabis, and it's always been that way. And so I think that we will see events looking a lot like regular music festivals, regular events, community events that we see right now, except with cannabis. Now, down the road, I would love to see both alcohol and cannabis exist in one place. I think we're not going to get there anytime soon, but I would love to see that, because as people become more responsible for their cannabis consumption, I think that both worlds can exist together.
And I can also add on to that, and you guys are getting the sneak peek of what the vision is. I've been all over the state trying to get a municipality to opt in. I think I finally got one. But an example is one that my team is working on right now, which would be like a holiday themed, tentatively Festival of Trees event. So imagine a holiday event where we have trees. Anyone who's a sponsor gets both a booth as well as either a tree or menorah, and they decorate it. And it's a People's Choice Award for the best decorated one. There's sales, there's education, because we want it to be a shopping event where people can buy stocking stuffers, learn about cannabis, things of that sort. And then there's like a lounge, kind of like a lounge lodge that you would have at the North Pole, where consumption would be. So I think we finally got a municipality, but that's kind of the concept, where you have something for someone who's kind of curious, whether they know what products they want, they can go there, or they're there to learn and explore. And if they see something cool, they ask a question and they may buy a holiday gift, kind of thing.
I guess going back to a point that Jamie made about having cannabis consumed the same time as beer at festivals, like a beer expo, where you could also consume marijuana. And Andrew, do you think you could kind of elaborate on what's hanging that up right now and what the future of that is and what would need to change in order to get there?
So one of the main things that's holding that up right now is that temporary alcohol permits are only issued to events sponsored by nonprofits. And I don't think we have the cannabis companies that are nonprofits. So the overlay there is going to be a little bit challenging while that restriction is there from the alcohol permitting side. But then also in general, that adds a host of other potential concerns when you think about individuals who might be utilizing multiple intoxicating substances at the same event. And that obviously has to be considered. I think municipalities are going to be probably a little more concerned about that, particularly until we've seen some cannabis events take place and understand what the inherent concerns might be for public health, safety, and welfare from the cannabis event itself before we start introducing other aspects to that. I think my guess is the way this evolves is we see specific cannabis-focused events, and then as Tatiana and Jamie have been saying, we'll see other types of entertainment and other things layered into that over time. And it'll give us a chance to learn and grow and put the appropriate regulatory boundaries in place so those things can happen safely. And I think as long as we can ensure from the state level that those things can be done safely, then we can start to remove some of those barriers and let them expand a bit.
So are those barriers, are those administrative rules, or are those laws that, like, for instance, you have to be a nonprofit?
I'm not sure if that MLCC requirement is in statute or in rule, honestly. But I think some of the barriers are more going to be a level of comfort with municipalities to approve those as well. As Tatiana said, we have most municipalities already don't permit cannabis establishments in their communities. And even of those that do, the 100 or so, a little over 100, not all of those, in fact, very few of those, I want to say 10 or so was the last count, expressly permit temporary events within their ordinances. So there's very much a wait and see attitude at the local level. And I think as we see some of those events take place, then we'll understand them a little bit more and there'll be a better level of comfort as time goes on.
So I know of at least 3 prior events. There was the Dope Sounds in Addison on May 29th, the Niles Cannabis Festival, July 31st in Niles, and the 420 Cannabis Festival in Lansing. Does anyone have an idea how those events went? I mean, were they successes, failures, or what could be learned from those events as far as future events?
I attended the JARS event. We had a client, Midden Extracts and Canico, that had a booth there. So I was able to attend that Friday at the JARS Fest. And it was good. I would just say, at least the times that I was there on Friday, I was surprised that there wasn't an overwhelming, amount of attendees. It could have been, it was Friday. But that was just one thing that I noted.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were a little bit lower attendance on this year's events. And, marketing is just going to be really important around that and letting the community, because not everyone in our community is a cannabis consumer, so we need to be reaching out to the outer lying areas and helping them understand this is a community event and just marketing them a little bit better. And, I think that can be done with these partnerships and which is why I'm wanting to partner with an existing company that's already doing these events opposed to doing it myself, because I'm a big believer in teamwork.
And I think I was just going to say, I think there's a best practice of, eating the elephant, chew by chew or whatever. Just, when you look at scale, even some of the events that we're looking at doing, we're not coming out the gate, with these huge layouts and just expectations, just because you don't know the effect of the pandemic. You don't know a lot of different things. A lot of these municipalities who have opted in are in rural areas, so you have to factor in travel time and things of that sort. So there's just a lot of factors, I think, as an event producer and organizer, you really have to take into account before you make that level of investment.
Mm-hmm. And Director Brisboe, I mean, we know some of those the things that have made it difficult, such as cities not allowing cannabis consumption. But I'm wondering, are there a lot of events that tried to get through that didn't make it? Or, I mean, is there a trend of things that are kind of hanging up people that are trying to get events when they get to your level?
No, we haven't denied any applications, or I mean, we had a number of applications in process. Tatiana had one that were pulled back when the pandemic hit. So that was really the only thing that was a determining factor in not having applications go through at this point. And I think since then, as things have started to open up a little bit, though the nature of things being inconsistent when it comes to whether event spaces are open or what restrictions are for the number of people being there and what public health orders might be in place, I think is making it challenging to plan events overall, not just in the cannabis space. So I think when the world is a little closer to being back to normal, then we'll start to see some of these things get planned and be able to move forward. I think in this space where things are changing in the industry side regularly, when you overlay that with the fact that public health guidance is regularly changing depending on how things are going, it just makes it very hard to plan something and devote the energy and resources to it to be sure it's going to play out. So I don't think the prospect of getting a license from the state is really what the holdup is at this point. And I think that when you talk about municipalities permitting these types of events as well, that they're concerned about those other public health factors that are not cannabis related as well, in terms of, is this the right time for them to be looking at allowing different types of events when in a lot of cases they're trying to discourage large groups of people from gathering in the first place.
Right. And one event that I think a lot of people have heard of before is like the High Times Cannabis Cup, and they existed in Michigan prior to legalization and licensing. So I'm kind of curious, like if there's big events like that kind of do the national circuit, what's the avenue they have, if any, to have an event in Michigan? What would they have to do?
Be the same pathway as any other events. They'd have to either get an MEO license or work with someone that already had one and find a place where those were acceptable. And I think, we look at the other type of license that could potentially be tied with temporary events or the designated consumption establishments. We still have none of those licensed in the state. A lot of the same concerns during the pandemic about opening up those types of sites and a reticence at the municipal level as well. And I think some of the entrepreneurs I've talked to about designated consumption is how to make that model profitable. But I think there's a pathway where you have a consistent host for events where there's already a designated consumption establishment license, and then you could utilize that to host events in order to bring on-site sales. So I think we'll see some of that model start to be utilized in the future as well.
All right. And Jamie and Tatiana, we're about out of time for this segment. So I was hoping maybe you guys could give some parting remarks. I mean, it could be anything about where you think this is headed, improvements to the licensing system that you think it would make it more accessible, whatever you want. Go ahead, Jamie.
Well, I want to point out, if you see in the chat, Float Presents, Nancy with Float Presents, who did the 2 music festivals in Niles, is pointing out the fact that they had over 40 to 50 police, and there were no arrests and no major incidents. And so I really hope that a lot of these municipalities are taking notes, because we can't forget the fact how much pain some of these venues have felt over the last year and a half with the pandemic. And I think this is a great time to open up this opportunity for some of these venues and help them generate some of the revenue that they lost over the last year and a half. And so I think I just think it's important that the people in their communities need to be really putting some pressure on the municipality officials and really helping them understand that they want to see these types of events in their communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I would add is, again, the safe factor. I've had to go to municipalities, and one of the things that I kind of compared to is the process to get a liquor license when you are doing a temporary event. It still requires, Andrew didn't go into the application, you're required to have a certain level of insurance, you're required to have a security plan, you're required to have a diagram, what is it, Andrew, the cleanup a waste plan, so that if someone underage comes behind you and sees a bud, they're not then coming and smoking. So some of the things that the state requires is actually more than what's required for an event with alcohol.
Okay. All right. Well, we're out of time. Thanks a lot, Andrew, Jamie, and Tatiana. I appreciate it. Good conversation. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was amazing. And as I said at the top of the show, they are going to join us for the Q&A. So if you've got more questions at the end, we will bring them back up. But up next, we are going to be joined by Carrie Jacoby and Dave Harold. Carrie is one of my esteemed colleagues at the MLive Media Group, a true expert in building meaningful advertising campaigns for our cannabis clients that drive results. She's also a member of the Advanced Local Cannabis Committee. Joining her, Dave Harold. He is the Director of Audience Target Strategy at Advanced Local. He's an expert in data-driven advertising campaigns and has helped cannabis clients throughout the nation with targeted advertising strategies that reach their customers. Together, Carrie and Dave will break down marketing and advertising strategies for cannabis-related businesses that are following the regulations and drive results. As I said, if you've got questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end of the program. And without further ado, Carrie, Dave, floor is yours.
Thanks, Eric. Great. Let's talk digital advertising. Grace, do you want to move on to the next slide? Wonderful. All right. So as you may know, Facebook and Google don't allow paid advertising on their platforms, but there are many things that you can do to market your brand. Some of those are things that you can do yourself, and some of those are things that you can do through a media vendor. So let's talk about it. What are some things that you can do yourself? First up is SEO, search engine optimization. It is extremely important to have a presence in Google search engine, especially being that you cannot run any type of paid search. Knowing that most people do research prior to purchase, and knowing that most people do not scroll to page 2 in a search query, it's extremely important to have your website optimized so that when people are searching for relevant keywords, you show up on page 1. So how do you do that? How do you increase your search ranking? Start with the basics. Create your Google business profile. You list your address and your phone number on your website. You add your business to popular directory listings, gather reviews, create content, white papers, blogs, have an SEO strategy. So I know that sounds like a lot, but there are people here to help as well if that's something that you can't do yourself. Here at MLive in Advance, we have our own search team who lives and breathes SEO. We're more than happy to help you with consultation or any type of an audit with your website. Moving on, it's also really important to have a presence within search to be able to, within social, to post often, to educate your followers, engage with your followers, and talk about all the great things that you're doing in your communities. Not only do you want to engage with your current followers, but you also want to add hashtags to your postings to increase your followers as well. If you see that any of your content has extremely high shares, comments, engagements, be sure to reshare that, and you can actually even repurpose. So if there's a let's just say a blog that's performed really well on social, you can actually repurpose that into, say, a montage video that you can then post in a different way. Eric, jack of all trades, he's our social guy. For the first 8 people to email cannabis@mlive.com, he is giving out a free social media audit. So feel free to email cannabis@mlive.com to connect with Eric. And then lastly, just Google Analytics, making sure that you install Google Analytics on your website if you haven't already. Google Analytics is just a great reporting tool to be able to see who's coming to your site, what are they doing on your site, how much time are they spending on your site. And if you are running a paid campaign, you'll really be able to take a look at attribution. So what is that paid campaign doing on your site, and is it driving performance? And it's a great way too to be able to, as a media vendor, to be able to optimize towards performance. So those are just a few things that you can do yourself. Let's talk about some of the things you can do through a media vendor. So first of all, working with a publisher direct, right? So certain publishers do allow cannabis to run on their site. Here at MLive, we do. We can run display and video ads on mlive.com. It's really important to connect your messaging with a trusted, reliable, premium publisher. The reason being, it will then reflect back to your brand. We call it the halo effect. Integral Ad Science found that digital ads viewed on trusted editorial sites generate a more engaged audience for advertisers. So it's really, really important. There's multiple ways of targeting to really make sure you're honing in on your audience. There's contextual, and Dave Harold actually is going to go a little bit more in depth on these, but with contextual, it's essentially serving ads to people who have read and or are reading cannabis content on mlive.com. And then in terms of behavioral targeting, that's building out custom audience segments based on who you're looking to target. So if you're looking to target people who have anxiety, ADHD, daily aches and pains, we've even found like craft beer lovers and yoga enthusiasts. We've seen a lot of success with those audiences as well. Next up, high impact placement. So if you have a grand opening or any upcoming events, this is a really great place to own 100% share of voice across the homepage or any relevant section fronts. Again, all placements are yours for 24 hours. So it really makes a really big splash within those 24 hours. We do layer 21 plus on top in the cannabis category. And then next, programmatic. You guys may have heard it in the industry as programmatic or extended network. But basically this is expanding outside of the one publisher that you're working with. So let's say, for example, mlive.com, we're expanding outside of mlive.com, reaching your audience across hundreds, thousands of websites and apps. So it's really all about reaching the right audience at the right time, right place. It's very scalable. So you're getting a ton of scale. There's efficiencies. So it's bid based. You're bidding based on the value of each impression. And very sophisticated targeting. So we can actually target within the platform that we utilize. We can target people who are in market for THC on the B2B side. And on the B2C side, we can target growers. So again, it's really honing in on exactly who you're looking to reach within this big ecosystem of digital. We also work with this platform as well, where we've built out something called a PMP, a private marketplace buy, where we are working with, we basically are working with publishers who have raised their hand saying, we will accept cannabis advertising, which is really great because you're never gonna be threatened to get thrown off a site if, you know, sometimes that could happen in this space. So knowing that we have the assurance of working through this private marketplace buy is really important. We have been running with this partner for now, gosh, half a year, and we're seeing over 4 times industry average click-through rate. So it's performing extremely well. Video. So video is extremely effective in kind of more of the mid to upper funnel strategies. It drives a lot of brand metrics like brand recall, brand favorability. We partner with a company called Hoot, where not only are you running a 15 or a 30-second video, but there is an L bar which can showcase product and pricing within this L bar. And I will attach that in the chat after this presentation. I'll make sure you guys see it, but it's really impressive, especially for the holidays coming up. I think that could be a great idea. If you have any type of like a drink enhancer, you can showcase some cocktails, which can link for recipes. So that can make it extremely engaging. So those are a few things talking about behavior targeting, contextual. Let's talk a little bit about location-based targeting. So with location-based targeting, you can serve ads to people based on their lat long, their location. So for example, you can target competitor dispensaries, pain clinics, chiropractic offices, serve ads to users while they're at that location and then retarget them after they've left. Not only that, we can track foot traffic. So of those people you served ads to, how many stepped foot into your location? So everything is reportable. We can use those to optimize, see what locations are really driving the best foot traffic. And Dave's going to go more in detail on that as well. App retargeting. So this is serving ads to people who have certain apps downloaded on their mobile device. Leafly, Weed Maps. We can make assumptions that these people are in market for THC. So we'll serve them ads based on those apps that are downloaded. And then lastly, push notifications. You walk into a dispensary and you can essentially have a push notification pop up. That's immediate branding. And then if you swipe up, there's a full page interstitial that you can have a much lower funnel call to action. and you're only paying based on the engagement, based on the swipe up. So there's a lot of added value there on the branding side. Next, we have content. So I'm sure we've all heard in marketing, content is king. And I will say that holds especially true within this category. Content is extremely important to tell your story, to change perception, talk about what you're doing in your communities. And you can share that through sponsored articles. You can do that through video. So you can create 15, 30-second, 1-minute videos to really share that. And to really, video especially is like an emotional strategy. Sweepstakes, think about sweepstakes. Who doesn't love a brand that gives away free things? But not only is that great for the consumer, it's really great for you because it's a lead generation tool. People who enter sweepstakes, you can basically receive all of that information, all of those emails for a drip campaign. And then lastly, podcast. Again, Eric Hultgren, jack of all trades. He can interview you during podcasts and really share your story. Event sponsorships, similar to the one that we're doing today. And then just a note on conversion tracking and optimization. We talked about the value of inputting Google Analytics onto your site, but also conversion tracking. So if you have very low funnel conversions that you're looking for, if it's an email newsletter sign up, or if you can purchase product on your page, let's place conversion pixels on those thank you pages so that we can track from an advertising campaign how many conversions that's driving, not only to really understand the ROI on that, but then to also be able to optimize to find more users like that and to improve performance. So I know that's a lot in just a short amount of time. Feel free to email that cannabis@mlive.com if you have any other questions or just to chat. I love this industry, so I'm always open for a good conversation. I am going to pass it over to Dave Harold, who's going to talk more about the targeting side. Dave.
Hey, Carrie, thanks. Yeah, so let's, Grace, can you just flip to the next slide? So for cannabis advertising, we tend to lean heavily into mobile. That's where a lot of the customers seem to be. Everyone's got a phone. Not everyone has a computer. Not everyone has a connected television, but everyone's got a phone. And that's one of the, pardon me, that's one of the devices that we tend to lean heavily on. And in doing that, one of the tactics that we use is called geofencing. So geofencing is basically just creating a radius around a point, whether that point is a postal address or really any location that has a GPS signal, and then reaching any device that happens to generate an ad impression inside that geofence. So if someone's playing a game on their phone, checking the weather, reading a news article, checking sports scores, as long as they're using an app, we can reach them through an ad-supported app. This is used for behavioral targeting. That's reaching people in doing similar things in similar locations. Like the map you see on the right-hand side of the screen would be targeting sleep centers in the Grand Rapids area. So someone who has maybe a sleep disorder might be a good candidate for cannabis advertising. We also use this for competitive conquesting. So reaching businesses similar to your own that might be competing with you in the same region. It's also used for branding. If you just want to tell everyone within a 5-mile radius where your business is and what you do, just as overall branding, it's also a great tactic. If you could flip to the next slide, please. Much like geofencing, we can use geo-retargeting, and that's as geofencing is reaching someone where they are right now. Geo-retargeting is reaching a device now based on where they were in the past. So we can observe where a device is in the past, and we can sort of adjust the recency and frequency of when we're looking, so that if we want to see, for example, the map on the right, all the devices that might have visited a pain management clinic in the Grand Rapids area over the last month, we can do that. And again, we can also use this for competitive conquesting, for branding. And this also allows us to reach, because we can adjust the recency and frequency of visits, it allows us to reach a more engaged audience. So maybe someone who's visiting a certain location multiple times over the course of a time period, like a couple of weeks or a month. So it's a really great tool to use in conjunction with geofencing. If we could jump to the next slide, Grace. The next is Geo Audience. This works a little bit differently. So with Geo Audience Targeting, we're targeting neighborhoods, not necessarily individual devices. So we're taking data from the census, and we're also taking purchase behavior data, and we're kind of mashing those together to find regions, small regions, neighborhoods that might be more engaged with a certain kind of product or a certain behavior. So for example, this map is showing in the Grand Rapids region the neighborhoods that over-index for drinking wine at home. This is generally great for behavioral targeting. It's great for branding as well. If we could jump to the next slide. I think Carrie mentioned this earlier when she was chatting with y'all. We can do foot traffic reporting as well, and this also works great with mobile devices. So when we set up geofencing or geo-retargeting, we can not only look in those regions in which we're delivering advertising, but we can also then monitor your business to see if any of the devices that saw the ads that were presented in those geofences end up visiting your business. We have a couple of different ranges, radiuses in size that we can monitor. If a location's really large, like a Walmart or like a Home Depot, that's more like 200 meters or 100 meters around a point, down to smaller shops in stores around 30 to 50 meters. So it also is it can show just how effective mobile advertising is to see that foot traffic report. If we could jump to the next slide. We also do a lot of other kind of reporting that can come out of our mobile location systems. One of the more useful reports is actually to be able to look at performance by location, by geofence. So if you're targeting 40 or 50 different geofences in the region, we can look at each individual one and look at the delivery and the performance of that location. This would allow you to go into a report and say, you know what, these 10 locations aren't really performing very well. Let's eliminate them from the targeting, and the performance of your entire campaign would be lifted at that point because your other locations would be performing better than that. We also report on all of the kind of the standard ad platform metrics. We can report by creative, by zip code, by city, by day, all of that sort of thing. But I've always felt that the reports by location are really, really handy to help optimize a campaign for performance. If we could jump to the next slide. Audience data. So if we kind of zoom out from mobile devices specifically and look at any kind of device, whether it's a computer, a tablet, a phone, a connected television, we have the ability to use data to group those devices together into audiences based on the behavior that we're seeing in those devices. So for example, we can use offline data like event or conference participants, magazine subscriptions, purchase history, loyalty card data, purchases that are happening offline. We're able to connect that to online data. We can also use online data as well. So browsing behaviors, online purchases, social shares, and advertising interactions. Those also get wrapped up into audience as well. And audience data is usually kind of grouped into two larger categories of declared data, which is data that a person would freely give. So someone who would, answer a survey or a poll or something like that online. It could be loyalty card data or frequent flyer data, as well as inferred data, and that would be data that we observe about someone. So these would be someone's maybe reading habits or buying habits or the websites that are visited. On to the next slide. And I think Carrie also mentioned contextual targeting. We lean heavily on contextual targeting for any device. And this really lets us take a really granular look at what's being read and whether or not we want to deliver advertising to those pages on behalf of our advertisers. We can target very broad categories, entertainment, sports, but we can also target very, very specific keywords and determine what an article is about before we deliver advertising to that article. This allows us to lean into certain subjects and also avoid certain subjects. We can block or exclude certain topics from advertising delivery. And I think we might have reached the last slide. I don't know if I'm going to pass this back to Eric.
That would be me, Dave. Yes, for sure. Thank you, my friend. That was awesome. And guys, as I said, they went through a ton of information in about 20 minutes. So if you've got questions, make sure you get them in the chat. We'll bring them back in about 25 minutes. And you can reach them through the email they said, cannabis@mlive.com. And we'll put that in the chat so you can reach out to them as well. Next up, let's talk about franchising in the cannabis industry. And when I say the word franchising, typically we all think of the golden arches, but franchising isn't just good for fast food. It's a versatile business model, that can be used in the cannabis industry. So we're going to talk to two friends of mine from Unity Road. First up is Justin Livingston. He is the VP of Franchise Development at Unity Road, 15 years of experience in growing franchises worldwide. Prior to Unity Road, he was the VP of Global Development for Coyote Ugly Saloons. He's also the founder of the Franchise Transformations. It's a franchise consulting firm that specializes in all aspects of franchising, including helping create robust franchise programs from existing independent businesses. And Nate, who we'll get to in a second, he co-owns Unity Road, Boulder, Colorado with his father, Bruce. With backgrounds in real estate and construction, they see cannabis as an alternative to alcohol, opioids, and other far more potentially harmful pain and stress management options. The Wetzels entered the cannabis industry as a Unity Road shop owner, and they did that because it offered a trusted source for the local community. And you'll get to see a view of some work that they're doing on the store. I'm excited to share with you, in a second. Welcome, Justin and Nate. Like I said, we'll get to Nate in a second. But first, Justin, how are you, buddy?
Eric, I'm doing well, my friend. Thank you for having me. Thanks for putting on this killer conference here.
It is our pleasure. And, like I said in the intro, when people hear that word franchise, and obviously with your background with Coyote Ugly and all of that, there's a perception of what a franchise is. And Unity Road is blazing a trail, no pun intended, in, using some of those learnings, I would imagine, and bringing them into the cannabis industry. So I want to start first, for people who might not know you, you're a tour de force and a dude that I love talking to about this industry. But how did you make the transition? You go from Coyote Ugly to Unity Road. How do we find you here today?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the kind words. Really, franchising is about helping people. That's what it boils down to. It's about helping people navigate the complications of getting into business or putting them on a road for success that they otherwise would have a hard time navigating. And so we talk about the big franchises and the ones that people know, but it's amazing how many businesses are franchises, and that it's about keeping money and ownership local and about helping people change their legacy and do something for themselves where their efforts are rewarded with business ownership that they can change their family and change their communities. So when I was cranking around franchising, having a good time, and really kind of had adopted that philosophy of helping people navigate those complications, I got a call about cannabis. And the reality is those complications, they're crazy here. For any of us that are in it, there's more complications here than any other industry that I've ever even heard of. And so to bring franchising to an industry with that level of complications, from licensing all the way to balancing profitability and compliance, is really an honor. It helps people, it reduces the barrier of entry, and then it helps people not only get doors open, but continue to be successful in ways that franchising hasn't seen either. So it's really nice to bring cannabis to franchising and franchising to cannabis. It's a great win-win.
So Justin, you hit on some of the points of what franchising does for the business owner and the brand itself, but let's look the other direction. From a consumer perspective, what does franchising in the cannabis space do to help the consumer navigate through this in states and in communities where might be brand new to them?
Yeah, so the franchising piece brings stability, consistency, reliability, and that's something that this nascent industry really needs. We've all probably been into some dispensaries and you're like, this is the nicest place I've ever been. And then you go into another dispensary and you kind of fear for your life a little bit. And so that fragmentation that the industry has without the branding, without the consistency that people are used to with franchising is really important, especially as people are beginning to understand what this industry and this product can even do. There's a real obligation to educate consumers and have a consultative approach. And the dispensaries of old were kind of that deli style where you went to the counter and somebody's eyes were burning the back of your head and heaven forbid you had a question, and they certainly may or may not have the answer behind the counter. But we're flipping the script on that and bringing a consultative, very customer-centric approach. Sounds like franchising, right? Where it's really about that experience. It's about not just the product, but the entire experience from the parking lot all the way through the product, that customer interaction, and then on your way out the door, that product experience and that loyalty that gets developed because of all of that. So from a consumer standpoint, it's about having something that you can count on, knowing what product, what level of product, what pricing is going to be, what that experience is going to be like, that you can get help, you can get answers, and you can have that consistently from store to store to store within a state and even from state to state.
So Justin, the last 2 years has been abnormal in just about every sense of the word, but cannabis has grown exponentially in states where it has been legalized. And so for Unity Road, let's just take the last 18 months. What has that been like for the brand, building up franchises and navigating through not only COVID protocols, but what came after that and where we're going into the future?
Exhausting. It's been very tiring. It's been so busy. There's been so much opportunity that has come out of this. Look, we were deemed essential, as we all know. And so as other people were pivoting was the word of the day, right? People used to do drinking games where when somebody says pivot,
yes,
but everybody was pivoting and trying to figure out what to do. And boy, we were sure trying to figure out what that model looked like. It expedited a lot of things like curbside pickup and delivery and drive-throughs and things that we all knew were coming, but were probably, frankly, years down the road. The pandemic expedited a lot of that. So it changed the industry in a really positive way. But by being essential, and what that allowed people to do to get the medicine that they needed to deal with the stress and anxiety, or just to relax and check out, or whatever you were using the product for, to be able to offer that to the community was really a privilege. But then it changed everything from state to state too, because you've got these state budgets that have been obliterated because businesses are operating at diminished capacity. And they're sitting there looking at states like Colorado going, another record month of revenue and taxes from the cannabis industry. And it really acted as a catalyst for states saying, there's great sound bites from politicians going, I don't know how we have deemed illegal what other states have deemed essential. And that's why we saw 5 new states in the November election, I think another 3 or 4 since then. And that's going to continue to go because these states want this stable, tax producing, community changing industry in their neighborhoods.
So as I said, and I've been continuing to say, if you've got questions specifically about franchising, you can get them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. Justin, one last question, then we'll bring Nate on here in a second. But give me some misconceptions that people think when they think franchising and cannabis that you guys can maybe dispel with all of your knowledge base in the space.
Yeah, I think people, well, first of all, people just don't know. It hasn't been a thing, right? And so they think franchising and they think big MSOs, right? These multi-state operators that come in and they buy things for cheap. There's no real loyalty to the community. Franchising is the exact opposite of that. And I think that's the biggest misconception. We're all about local. That's why we named it Unity Road. It's the corner of Unity Road in your community. And so we want to keep that money within families, within neighborhoods, within communities, and keep it very, very local. So I think the biggest misconception is that franchisors are these big, bad people up on this pedestal. And that's not true at all. Franchisors are folks who have been good franchisors, are folks who have been in the trenches, which we've been for 12 years in legal cannabis here in Colorado and beyond, with 120 years of depth of bench of collective experience in cannabis. And we just want to help people have the benefits of being in this industry and the legacy that they can leave, the generational wealth that they can make. We want to do it safely because we know that this road is full of potholes. And so if we can help navigate that and kind of ride shotgun on this journey with folks and keep people safe, that's what franchising is all about.
That was well played, my friend. You want to bring Nate on? Let's bring Nate on.
Let's bring Nate on.
Wetzel, let's talk a little bit about this process.
Hello.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well.
Good. So first of all, kind of give people a lay of the land. Where are we finding you today? And, how long have you been working with Unity Road?
I've been working with the Unity Road for what is going to be sooner rather than later 2 years, but I'm actually in my office right now. This is kind of a faux background. This is a remodel render of what we're intending to do. But yeah, I'm here in Boulder, Colorado.
Awesome. So Nate, obviously you're in business with your father. You guys were in real estate. You probably still are in real estate, but what got you into franchising with Unity Road?
Well, I've been kind of looking at this space actually for a number of years, and it seemed like a very interesting place to be. There was a very nascent industry trying to figure out what it's going to look like, but it was fairly treacherous. It seemed like there was a lot of ways where you could get yourself into real trouble. And so as I was continuing to evaluate that, I had a few things happen in my life where my mother, who was an alcoholic, managed to drink herself to death finally. And I looked at this as a way to maybe create an off-ramp for people who might be looking for one. I tried to get my mom to convert, but we were in a prohibition state and she was from a different generation. And I think that those sort of things, that lack of normalization was a challenge. And when that happened, this went from a would I, could I, should I sort of scenario to really an ought. This is something that I ought to do.
Awesome. So what made you land with Unity Road, right? There's lots of ways to kind of enter this industry. And what made you pick these guys?
What got me involved in Unity Road is that quest to figure out how to get into this industry and reduce some of those barriers to entry. I listened to a podcast and that's where I became aware of Unity Road. So then I started looking into cannabis franchising, what was available, what kinds of services were available to try to mitigate some of the risks to entry that I was very concerned about. And what I found was a lot of people that wanted to sell you business plans or like, here's a paint by numbers sort of scenario with no real continued back end support, which Unity Road has provided me very efficiently with and very well. And so as I started to kind of absorb what options were on the board, I came back to Unity Road and looked into them and who they were as operators. At that point, I reached out to Justin here and we had our initial conversations, and over a course of several months, we kind of, I think, mutually selected each other. And that's where we wound up. You can ask all the dates to the prom you want, but you got to find the one that wants to take you back.
Yeah, you have to find the one that says yes, for sure, my friend, for sure. So let's kind of get into maybe not totally into the weeds, but a little bit about the acquisition process. So Justin, Nate just said you guys sort of had a courtship going on and mutually picked each other. What happens after that, and kind of what does that process look like? And for those of us who maybe understand a little bit about franchising, I bet we'll know some of these steps, but in the cannabis industry, what happens next?
Yeah, so some of the things that are prevalent in the franchise industry outside of cannabis, just making sure it's a good fit, are really exponentially more important here. We have to make sure it's a really good fit, that people are going to be safe, that we're a newer brand. This is a newer idea. And so we have to find people that are going to be good stewards of the brand. So we've got a really robust mutual investigation. As Nate said, we kind of pick each other at the end, and then we choose which adventure we're going to go on. So in some states like Colorado, it's the acquisition of an existing dispensary. That's virtually all there is an opportunity. In Michigan, you still have opportunities for new licenses and or acquisitions. So part of that mutual investigation is figuring out what's your plan, which is about time and money and desire and where you're at and what you're looking to accomplish, what your goals are. And then we find that path, that avenue, so that when we join forces, we can be at a dead sprint together towards the goal.
And so Nate, you go through this process. What were some of the struggles you went through after the acquisition, right? You get a space to do this. And then what were some of the struggles you've been going through, 2 years into this business?
Well, one of the first things is really accomplishing the rebrand. And then once that happens, there's people that have been shopping at the shop that I purchased. I purchased a place that was already in existence and ready to sell. And so they have a history and a loyal customer base. And there's a lot of folks in the world who don't like change, so figuring out how to readdress those customers that have been good customers, both on our medical and our rec side, let them know that the things that you like will still be here. In fact, we're going to try to make them better. Messaging that out is challenging. I mean, the acquisition process in and of itself is very challenging, which Unity Road was very helpful with. I mean, weirdly talking at this level, it feels like we kind of jumped the shark over here about what it takes to actually land a shop in an existing market. And they were instrumental in that. Then as we continue to move on, changing our POS, setting up better and SOPs than what had existed in the past, helping with supply lines, training, and kind of change and helping me create a culture here that we are aimed very much at our guests and educating them. Much like Justin said, as when we have people come in, I don't want to have someone burning a hole in the back of somebody's head because they're waiting because they have a question. We are trying to set up a situation where if you come in here and you know exactly what you want, we got you. If you are coming in and you're one of the first times you've ever been in a cannabis dispensary, or maybe it's the first time you've ever interfaced with cannabis at all, we want to be able to walk you through that, get you a good, clear, clean experience that you would be looking for. I would hate to have anyone leave my shop not educated on the products they bought and have a poor experience.
Absolutely. So Justin, let's go back quickly and maybe an elevator pitch style of what that acquisition is like. How do you guys help a franchisor find a spot? And quite honestly, shoot me straight, how difficult can that be depending on where you are on the planet?
Yeah, that last part is the key part, right? Depending on where you are, dictate your opportunities. So if you're looking at an existing market, acquisitions, there's no list. People always say, well, give me the list, because they're used to buying commercial real estate, or they're used to buying a house, right? Well, show me the MLS. It's all about relationships. Most of the things that are for sale are not on market, right? So it takes that relationship building, and then it just takes a lot of trust and a lot of patience. Patience is probably the key word. When people say, what do I really need to have here? And they're expecting me to say money, and boy, you got to have money. It's patience, because this stuff just takes a long time, right? It was said earlier, right? Eating the elephant one bite at a time. That is really, you just kind of keep plugging, you keep plugging. And in the case of a franchise in Unity Road, you've got so much power behind you to help you continue plugging down that road. As Nate kind of mentioned some of them, training, getting the license, finding the acquisition, getting open. Carrie and Dave talked a lot about some of the struggles in marketing. That's a real thing. Gus talked about the opportunity, but how do you get there? How do you get to those opportunities, those big numbers, those millions and millions of dollars that every state is seeing every month? And the reality is the potholes, as I refer them to, but they're very real. And they come down to balancing profitability and compliance and making smart choices. Revenue is not just the only thing. It's a lot of really great dispensaries with huge revenues keeping nothing to the bottom line because they don't know how to navigate those complications. And so trusting the system is a key component of that. And that kind of goes back to why we spend so much time dating before the I do's.
Absolutely. So Nate, last question before we get into the Q&A portion of the program. What does the future look like for you? You've got the remodel behind you, which looks incredible, by the way, but what else is in the future for you guys?
Well, yeah, getting this remodel actually done, we're taking action on that right now, will be a huge step. And I'm really looking forward to that, because that's going to change us not only with our look and how we handle our guests, but operationally, it's going to clean up a lot of things. But I'm looking to expand. I want to continue to try to build out a network of these. We're currently looking at a few different options on the board here in the state of Colorado. Ultimately, I would love to take this stuff home to Iowa, where I'm from. But there's some dominoes that need to fall. I think following the I-80 corridor would be good. I think Nebraska is having meaningful conversations in their legislature about both adult use and recreational. And then that gets me closer to Iowa. Hopefully Iowa then, by the time I'm able to establish that, we'll be ready to make the change that I'd like to see them make.
Awesome. Gentlemen, this has been amazing. As always, if you've got questions for these guys, Justin, Unity Road, website is where they go to kind of start the
Yeah,
process, maybe?
unityroad.com. And, we've talked a lot about the global scale. It's kind of fun being a national franchise to be able to help people across the country. But boy, we're sure focused on coming. I'm a Michigan guy at heart, born and raised. We're really coming in hot and heavy to the Mitten State because there's so much opportunity, and Michigan is doing such a great job that we're excited to be able to bring some of that stability and consistency home for me. Nate talked about home in Iowa. I want to bring this home to Michigan, and the good folks of the Mitten State are, I think, ready for it.
Awesome. Gents, we'll bring you back in just a second. I got to do some housekeeping and we'll get to the Q&A, but thank you so much for the time. Now,
Thanks.
Before we move on to that Q&A, we want to hear from you because these events are only as good as the information we get from you on what we should build. So as we move forward in 2022 and we do these Cannabis Insight events, we want to know what you want to see. So we've got a couple questions up here, and I'll give you kind of a second to kind of answer them. Do you want to attend another virtual one of these in 2022, a hybrid version, or all in person? That's question number one. Should we continue through smaller sessions or a larger cannabis conference? So a one date with a whole bunch of these or multiple dates throughout the year. And then the third one is, what sort of topics do you want us to cover? This branding and marketing one was one we were asked for. So we put this one together. So the impact and insight that we get from you guys is super helpful going into 2022. So I'll kind of give you like 30 more seconds to answer those poll questions, and then we will bring back all of our guests and get into some Q&A. So let me start checking and seeing what questions we have. So if you have questions, you can throw them anywhere. You can throw them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will get to them. So let's bring our panelists back and we'll start digging into the questions here. All right, so Jamie, I'm going to start with you and Tatiana because I think this question is for the two of you because you guys just got to hit on it and the panel sort of ended. But one of the things that I am super passionate about helping, and that's why I like to host these events, is this normalization of this industry and kind of taking away the stigma. And so as soon as you guys started talking about events, there's probably 7 people talking about how safe the Niles event was or the Float event. I'm not actually sure if that's one event or 2 events, but because I'm plowing through those chats. But could you and Tatiana kind of talk about ways in which people who are viewing this webinar and work in this industry can help to normalize to say these events are safe, we can totally have them, let's all do a thing together?
Well, I again got to give some kudos to the ladies at Float Presents, the 2 Niles Music Festival, because they always have the education factor attached to their events. They always, I know that they're trying to do some education around women's health and just, working with their sponsors and the vendors at the events to also make it an education focused type of event. And so I think, that's how we create that space for people in our community to attend these events more if we supply that, because they're looking for information, and a lot of the people with the information are those producing the products, and that's what these events allow us to do.
Tatiana, can you go ahead.
Certainly. So outside of the anecdotal side of things, I always try to go into data. So that's actually one thing that I'm trying to gather, is the data behind, any sort of arrest, violations, things of that sort. When I go to these municipalities, again, I don't know if it's a matter of scale. I don't know if we, were to go to some of these events where High Times was in the past, where they had tens of thousands of people, versus some of these other events where, it was a fraction of that, to see if it's a matter of economies of scale. But anecdotally, I know we advocate for that as a whole. But I think for some of these municipalities, we're going to have to present them with strong and real data from, their public law enforcement, all those agencies and things of that sort to really make that case.
Absolutely. All right, Dave, I'm going to throw it to you for a second because you only had 10 minutes to kind of plow through what is a lifetime of understanding of data targeting, right? But I'm wondering if you could maybe pull out any sort of learnings you've learned by covering nationwide. We've been focused on Michigan. This is what we've been doing here. You kind of come at it with a different lens where you've seen other markets. Are there ways in which, or things in which we should think about that are universally working in targeting, and ways in which we should think about things that might work specific to a geo that we're working in, i.e. Michigan versus, let's say, Colorado?
I think, I mean, for advanced local, I think any market where we have just one of our core news and information sites, we can definitely lean into the contextual targeting, and that's worked really well, whether we're targeting in Massachusetts, at our market there, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania, or wherever an advanced local property happens to be. The traffic on our owned and operated sites tends to produce really good performance. So that's something that we lean into when we're able to. Outside of that, in other markets, that's where we can, combine mobile and data and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking about one of our local news information sites, that's we kind of treat those locations a little differently.
Awesome. All right, Justin, this next question is for you. The question is, if marijuana becomes federally legal, covering the whole country, what will that do to franchising, in your opinion? Did we lose you? All right, I don't know where Justin went, so perhaps I will pick the brain of Director Brisboe with that question. What, in your best guess, like, what do you think that will do with franchising? Will that, will that grow it, or will that tamp it down?
Well, I think it kind of depends on what federal policy reform looks like, which is a huge question mark overall. One of the things that we've been working on through an organization called the Cannabis Regulators Association, which represents 35 state regulatory, or 35 states and their various regulatory programs and structures, is ensuring that state regulators have a seat at the table in discussing federal policy reform so that the impacts on existing state markets can be analyzed. So I think a lot of this franchising that we see is, at least from my perspective, is largely based on the state-by-state structure. Because you can't go across state lines, there are businesses that want to have their brands recognized in certain states without necessarily coming into that state and establishing brick and mortar and moving into that state. At the same time, you may have the decentralization of, or I should say, the centralization of sort of corporate offices with an interest in branching out to other states, which might actually be easier. So it kind of depends on what the federal framework looks like and what that does to these boundaries where we have state by state markets right now.
Awesome. Justin is back on. So Justin, I'm going to kind of twist the question, because I think Director Brisboe did a great job of kind of answering it. But one of the questions we have about franchising is, how does franchising help remove the pothole, in air quotes, because it's all about branding, of capital for social equity licenses, or licensees, I should say?
So the capital issue remains, right? I mean, we do have lots of connections. Franchising on the franchise or franchisee relationship side is about connections. And so it doesn't change the fact that the federal status for funding isn't there. It doesn't change the fact that a lot of these social equity programs are great for licensing, but leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to helping these now license holders actually have the capital to start. What it does allow us to do is pair good partners. So we've got partners that are family offices, private money, folks who want to invest but can't be boots on the ground, but are looking for partnerships. So the connection component is one way to help kind of combat that very difficult issue.
Awesome. Carrie, I'm going to throw this one to you. For people who saw the presentation and might want to get more information about the location data, right? The being able to find somebody who has walked into your location. Is there a case study or anything that we can kind of point them to show what we've been doing in the space, so they can get a little bit more of a high level look at what that technology looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure to include that. And it's really been interesting just over the past couple of years, seeing these geofencing campaigns ranging from, either targeting competitor locations versus those other locations that we discussed, be it kind of more of the can curious with the pain management centers, the chiropractors. But right now we're currently seeing anywhere from 90 to 120 walk-ins a month. And again, that is based on those who were served an ad at a location, and or if someone was retargeted, we can tell if someone was served an ad and then stepped foot. So that's quite a huge amount of conversions, especially when you start thinking about lifetime value of a customer. But I absolutely, Eric, can share a couple of those case studies.
Awesome. And then Nate, a question for you. People are thinking about franchising and someone comes up to you, you know, or you meet at a dinner party or a networking event, and they ask you about franchising. What would you say to them if they're thinking about getting into the space and going the franchise route?
Be willing to work. Absolutely. This my experience with it, and I believe that this is the right way of approaching really any business that you're getting into, is this is really isn't and shouldn't be a set it and forget it investment opportunity. This is a job that I think that you need to work and then form a team to start managing it for you before you move on to the next one. But you should be involved in this and have boots in the ground level. That would be my personal takeaway. If I was trying to run this show by remote and I was in Iowa trying to just do this thing over Zoom calls and phone calls, I don't know that we would execute very well.
Perfect. All right, friends, we're going to do a quick round robin and we'll let you go for the day. Kind of your last thoughts on the day when we're talking about marketing and branding in the cannabis space. Tatiana, I want to start with you, with your expertise in the sports world, and the sports world is all about branding. So, maybe kind of give us some words of wisdom on your way out the door of how to think about branding in this space.
I always like to look at it as what is your differentiator and what's the value that you bring to the consumer. And so establishing that and making sure that you properly message that is ideally the key.
Absolutely. Jamie, last thoughts.
Well, I often tell people in order to be success, I mean, like this market continues to build and we're going to see it continue to build as more and more of these operations get operational. You got to keep your customer coming back, seeing it repeatedly. You also need to give back to the community. As you're pulling some of this money in, it's really, really important that we give back, because the community needs it. And, it's just a great way. I mean, you got to build your relationship with your community members to keep them coming back.
Dave Harold, your last thoughts for the day.
I just think as more and more businesses come online, the competition is getting fierce for customers. So having the ability to differentiate yourself from your neighboring businesses is a must. So I guess that's my parting thought. I think advertising isn't necessarily a what if I should do this. It's a when should I do this, and how quickly should I do it.
For sure. Carrie Jacoby, your parting shot.
Think about the full marketing funnel and really get your messaging out in different ways. Video is really, really great, especially for this industry, to really share your story. So highly recommend that.
Nate, your parting shot, like maybe the biggest thing you've learned in the last 2 years that you can pass on to everybody else.
Well, I was just kind of thinking here, as everyone's doing their parting things, what's kind of shown me is important in this is if you're planning on getting in this business, one of the things that I think you should be aware of, and I think is a massive positive, is as you get into a better relationship with your guests, you're going to understand that you're making people's days better, both on the recreational and medical side. There's a lot of folks out here that are using this stuff from everything from anxiety to very serious illness. And every time, simply by the execution of your business, you're making somebody's day better. And that's reward in itself.
Absolutely. Justin, your parting shot, my friend.
Just say we're at a tipping point here with this industry to do things for families, for communities, for states, and maybe for the world, not to be overly dramatic, where we get to make a change from a business ownership standpoint in a really profound way to make lasting differences, leaving legacies, and changing communities for the better. My advice is don't do it alone. surround yourself, whether it's through Unity Road as a franchise or through those who have expertise in certain niches of this market. This is a complicated thing to do, and to do it right will give you an opportunity unlike anything we've seen. But surround yourself with people that are smarter than you.
And Director Brisboe, before I give you your parting shot, I just want to say you have been incredibly kind and gracious to come on these time and time again. So I want to say a huge thank you to you for taking the time and let you have the final parting shot.
I appreciate the invitation. You know, our agency focuses a lot on education and outreach and making sure that we're accessible. And I would just say the industry is growing and is becoming more and more competitive. Creativity is going to be crucial in setting yourself apart. But remember that our laws and rules are there not just because we like, writing up legal documents, but it's there to ensure consumers are protected, and ultimately so the perception of the industry is shifted. So make sure you're familiar with those. Make sure you understand other applicable laws. As I listen to marketing, I'm thinking about scrubbing digital marketing against the Children's Protection Registry Act. Those things all still apply in this space where you're marketing something that's restricted. So you really have to know how to run a compliant operation. So make sure you're familiar with all those requirements, because a black eye in the industry affects all of us across the board. So we want to work together to ensure that the perception is uplifted in this space.
Absolutely. Thank you, friends. This has been absolutely amazing. It has been a great time. And for those of you who've asked, if you haven't seen in the chat, we have recorded this. We will send this to you at its completion. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers who joined us today and gave us all of this amazing information. And one more time, want to thank our sponsors, Unity Road, Sarah Jane, Scilabs, and our media partner, Sensi. That's a wrap, my friends. I hope you have an amazing, I believe today is Thursday. It's hard to keep track these days, but I hope you have an amazing Thursday. Cannot wait to see you again soon. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk again soon.